Okay, so let's get the presentation started. When you are looking at doing online research, one of the most important factors for you to consider is the reliability of the research you're looking at. This is called resource evaluation. There are three questions in particular I want you to focus on. Is this credible? Is it accurate? Is it biased? When you're looking at this, there are a number of tools you can use. One of my favorites is the ABCs of evaluating resources. This looks at the authority and accuracy, bias and beneficiary, and the currency and coverage of the material written in this resource. So when you're looking at authority, you want to consider who wrote this, do they know what they are talking about, what are their credentials, and what type of website is it. Some people are going to be authorities within a particular field. These are typically going to be professionals that work within the field, research scholars in the field, perhaps some professors or research assistants, but somebody that works within the field is going to have more authority in that particular topic than, say, somebody posting on their personal blog. And then you want to also consider, is the information well written? Is there a bibliography? This has to deal with the accuracy of the information. While we may assume that if it is written by a person of authority, it's going to be more accurate, but you want to go ahead and double check as well. And this is looking at, do they use proper grammar? Are there any misspellings? Is it written in an official research paper format? Do they include a bibliography that you can then use to verify the information that they present in their paper? Now, looking at bias and beneficiary, one of the things that you will notice, particularly regarding any sort of propaganda, is that a lot of this information might be biased towards one side, misleading or advocating cause. It might present an unobjective argument or a subjective argument, or the publication was put out there specifically because it benefits somebody financially or politically. This happens actually a lot in our news sources, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. But I really want you to look at, when you're reading stuff, is while most publications do present a certain argument, a good argument is going to address both sides of the story and present a counter argument for why they do not agree with the other side. This is something that you really want to look out for, because that's going to create a stronger argument. They are going to typically be a more reliable source just because they do address both sides of the story. Now you want to look at currency and coverage. Currency is looking primarily at, when was this written? When was this particular piece of information published? When you're looking at this, it's going to give you an idea of how current the information is. This is not to say that older information is necessarily bad. There can be a lot of publications you might refer to and look at that were published quite a bit earlier, even 50 years ago, that are still reliable because they present a background or a theoretical foundation for the research you are presenting. That said, for certain fields, there are going to be a little bit more lenience or less lenience depending on what you're researching. For example, if you are a nursing student, you really need to look at publications from the last 3 to 5 years maximum. You want the most current information because the medical field is constantly changing. However, if you are writing a paper for history or art, or maybe a theoretical paper, that's not going to be as relevant, but you do want to be aware of any of the additional information that has been published since then. And then looking at the coverage, it's just the general, is it useful? Is the argument well supported? Is this particular paper or book that you're looking at relevant to what you are trying to research and write about? Now, I mentioned before that one of the things you want to look at, particularly regarding the authority of the resource, is what kind of website is it from? A .edu means it has been published by a college or university. This is typically going to be a very reliable source, especially if they also provided information about who the author is. If you're reading it and you see, this was maybe a undergraduate student research paper, it might not be as authoritative as a paper published by the professor, but it's still coming from a .edu. It was still approved by a professor to get posted in the first place. It's probably going to be a more reliable source. .gov is also a really good one. These are going to be any publications that were put out by a government agency, typically the federal government, but sometimes you'll see this at the county or state government levels. They can also be really good resources, especially if you're looking at kind of the public policy aspect of things. .org is from a nonprofit or advocacy agency. These sources are going to contain a lot more bias in them because they are trying to advocate for a specific cause. That, again, does not necessarily mean that they are bad resources. You just want to be aware of whether or not they are addressing a problem from both sides. If they address the other side of the issue and provide a counter argument for why they are advocating in the opposite direction. If it does not provide that additional information, they are probably going to be less reliable, or you may need to take that particular resource and then back it up with additional resources that provide the additional research and information on both sides of the argument. .com is the one that I would avoid. Anybody can get a .com web address, and a lot of times this information is not going to be vetted or confirmed elsewhere. If you are going to use a .com resource, I would say, one, do not cite it. Similar to how you would use Wikipedia, it may be a really good starting point. It might give you some of the background information. It might give you some key terms to research, some other ideas that you need to be aware of within this topic, but you need to confirm that information elsewhere. And then once you have confirmed that information, just use the sites or the articles, the books that you use to confirm the information rather than the original source you started with. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot in using online resources is the amount of fake news, propaganda, and bad information out there. This is especially prevalent in our news sources, but you also want to be aware of, a lot of organizations have a certain agenda they are trying to push, which is why you need to be aware of the .org websites as well. And in addition to the ABCs of evaluating sources, you want to look at the ones that are listed here. Some of them are going to be repeats, but this is looking specifically at how to be aware of fake news, propaganda, and bad information. Currency. Is it a recent article? If the article is not recent, the claims may no longer be relevant or have been proven wrong. Relevance. Is the article relevant? Determine the relevancy of the content for your purposes. Authority. Who is the author? Has the author written other articles on the same or similar topic? What are the author's credentials? What is the domain of the website? Many websites these days mimic the legitimate source. Take the time to look carefully. Is the source a blog or a news source? Is the website satirical or a hoax? Accuracy. Is this article from an unbiased source? Can the content be verified by multiple sources? If it appears in only one publication with no links to sources, it is very likely to be inaccurate. This is a particularly important with images that are shared widely across social media. And purpose. Does this article provoke an emotional response? Inaccurate news articles are often written for the sole purpose of provoking anger, outrage, fear, happiness, excitement, or confirmation of one's own beliefs. So this is an amazing chart, and I really recommend you reference it in looking at how biased or reliable a particular news source might be. Now, what you will see going from left to right is this is going to be, are they biased? So if they're on the left, these are going to be the liberal-leaning publications, going from the most extreme liberal to neutral skews liberal. Then going from the neutral is going to go from the leans conservative to the most extreme conservative. Now going from top to bottom, the top is going to be original fact reporting or just straight fact reporting. These are going to be the most reliable, accurate news sources out there. As you move farther down, you're going to get down into, selective, incomplete story, propaganda, or fabricated information. And you really want to be aware of where they fall within this bell curve. One of the things I would recommend, particularly if you are looking at this diagram, is to stay within this green rectangle. This is going to be the most accurate representation of the news. A really good one that I typically recommend is NPR. And as you'll see here, not everything is listed. You might come across a source. One of the ones that has come up recently for me is the YouTube video PragerU. As you can see, they are not listed here, but you can always Google whatever that publication is and include the term media bias, and it will typically take you to one of these websites. For PragerU, one of the first results that came up for me was for this media bias fact check webpage. And it basically just said that it is a very conservative leaning resource that is not particularly reliable because it only addresses one side of the argument. It's very biased. If you want to use one of those videos, I would recommend taking the content of that video and then affirming that the information presented using other more reliable resources. In addition to just checking for the media bias of these publications, these are websites that are also just really good for checking the facts. I'm sure you are all familiar with Snopes, where if you see something online and you're not sure if it's accurate, you can go to Snopes and get the full research story of where that has come about, why it's wrong. These other websites look at similar things, including, biases, which are addressed by media bias on all sides, to simple fact checking, such as the Fact Check and Fact Checker by the Washington Post, or it might just give you some information on the politics involved in the propaganda presented. So when you're looking at these online resources, it is just very important for you to be particularly critical over what you are reading and how that applies to the research you are trying to complete. This is not to say that you should not be evaluating your more scholarly resources as well. The ABCs of evaluating resources can be particularly helpful when you're looking at books or even when you're looking at scholarly articles. You want to be aware of what argument they're trying to make, and you want to be double checking that they are addressing multiple arguments before they come to their own conclusion. But this is especially important when you're trying to do research using Google or other search engines like it. Okay.